for, it looks like that color pair is very into having tapped creatures. So if you add having tapped creatures to the mix as an upside, like the Signpost Uncommon making a robot token, not only does it give you more upside, but it'll make it easier for you to station stuff because you have an extra creature that you can tap to station things. Most of them do become creatures, you know, that's what they've said. There is one that never does, the Eternity Elevator that we've seen. This one is just a mana rock, and it becomes a better one when you station it enough. It's an interesting card because a 5-mana mana rock that can tap for 3 is itself the kind of card that can have a home in a format, but station 20 plus to make it into like an insane mana generator, by that point in the game, it doesn't matter. So it's one that I'm worried about because it doesn't really ever add to the board, even if it does help you ramp, and it has an incredibly high station value before it ever gets upgraded. Whereas cards like Wormwall Sweeper, there's also the Seriema, which has an Interest trigger that lets you tutor up a legendary creature. And then, you know, it has Station, and if you get it to 7 or more, it becomes a 5/5 flyer, and other tapped legendary creatures you control have indestructible. So the things that you use to station it, in theory, will get indestructible. Same thing as when you attack. I mean, it does need to be legendary creatures, but Signpost Uncommons these days, for example, are like all legendary creatures. So you're going to have a few. A card like that does something, make sure you get a card of value right away. That's obviously going to be the kind of spacecraft that performs well in limited, whereas the ones that have small effects when they enter or don't do anything until you get to a high value on station, those are probably going to be bad in limited. And, you know, they printed some of these cards thinking more about Commander than Limited. Some of them will be completely useless, probably. The Eternity Elevator, that's kind of where I'm leaning. That one's probably not going to be what you want to be doing in Limited. While it's mostly spacecraft that have station, there are also planets. I think there's only going to be 5 of them, of 5 rares, and these are lands. That's actually one of the big themes in this set. You know, these days they don't tend to go crazy hard on card types and sets, like completely insane, but lands is one of the themes here. They wanted to make it feel, you know, like you're visiting different planets and moons and stuff like that. So we do have a lot of land stuff going on in the set, and there's a cycle of 5 lands, all of which have station, and they enter-tapped and can tap for mana of a specific color. And then they have Station, where you can upgrade them over the course of a game. We've got Uthros Titanic God Core, for example, which becomes Tolarian Academy when you get enough charge counters on it. Not going to matter that much in Limited, but it is a land that basically has serious upside. One of the other ones we've seen, Suzur Secundi, is probably going to be a lot better in Limited because it lets you give up creatures and draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power. So once you get that one upgraded, it's pretty good. I don't think there's like a bunch of payoffs for planet stuff because I literally think all we've got is a mythic rare cycle. I think this because in the lore, there are only 5 planets in this specific system that the set is mostly set in within the Edge. So I think we're only going to have 5 of them, and maybe we'll see some planet stuff later on. But in this set, the subtype doesn't look like it matters much. But these are lands with upside and very little downside. Entering tapped is downside, but like Suzur Secundi, for example, definitely a card you play in every black deck because it does have such a strong effect that you can use in the later game. All right, let's look now at Warp. So this is a new mechanic that lets you pay an alternate casting cost, usually cheaper than its normal casting cost, and it lets you cast the card, but it gets exiled at the beginning of the next end step. But you can cast it from exile. So it's a lot like various mechanics we've seen before. It's kind of like Adventure. Most of these creatures have an Enters trigger. So for example, Starfield Shepherd, warping it on turn 2 means you get to search up a Plains, or a card with mana value 1 or less, put it into your hand, and then it goes away, but you can cast it again later, get that trigger again, and get the body in the long term when you cast it for 5 later. It's also kind of like Evoke, right? Evoke is a mechanic where generally if you do the Evoke cost thing, especially in Limited, you just get an Interest trigger, but then the creature dies. In this case, they don't die. You get to hold on to that value for later in the game, and that's why I compare it more to an Adventure. The ones that are like this one, which is really reasonably costed, like, you know, if you have a 2-drop you need to play on turn 2, that's what you're going to do instead of warping it. But this is a 5-drop that can also fill the 2 slot on your curve in a reasonable way. Like if you really need a creature for the next turn, it can probably grab you one. you do need to have a few 1-drops for it to do that consistently. Or if you really need to hit a land drop, it can do that for you too. And then it comes back, does it again later, and gives you a pretty real body. It has, you know, like 3-for-1 potential because you get the interest trigger twice and the 3/2 flying body more permanently. There are other things you can do too, like you can sacrifice a creature that you warp into play. There are a few cards in the set that have warp synergies, including a whole mechanic that can make warp even better. Basically, I feel like any card that lets you warp and get some sort of card worth of value from their trigger is going to be good, because then you just cast it again later. I'm less confident about cards that are just like big dumb creatures that have warp. For example, they've shown us Red Tiger Mechan, which is a 4-mana 3/3 haste. Not good. And it has warp for 2, which means you can play it as a 3/3 haste on turn 2, but then it doesn't permanently add to the board. Cards like that don't ever really generate real value. Even if it can attack, like there are lots of boards where it just doesn't matter. Those are going to be a lot less interesting, especially when the casting them is so inefficient. Like a 4-mana 3/3 haste just isn't that good. So some of them are going to be really good. I think Starfield Shepherd, for example, is going to be great. But I think some of them aren't going to be great because they just don't do enough. Either way you cast them, and you don't really get like a 2-for-1 out of a card like Red Tiger Mechan at all. You just get a couple of mediocre cards stapled together. It does still have the advantage of filling your curve in 2 spots. Like, that matters. Maybe it ends up mattering more than I think. But I'm more inclined to like the ones that give you some real value when you warp them, as opposed to one that just attacks for 3. So as I was editing this video, I noticed there was something about warp that I forgot to mention that is in my notes, but didn't make it into me actually talking about it. And that is that it also works pretty well with station, because if you warp a creature in, you get the trigger. You can also tap it to station something, and you're not really giving anything up when you do that because the creature's going to leave anyway. I do still think big creatures, like the huge artifact creature where, like, basically its only purpose is to try to put counters on things because it's such an expensive creature. I still don't think a card like that's good. It's just going to be too one-dimensional. It's kind of like how most of the cards that were like all in on vehicles and Aether Drift weren't very good because they were only good with vehicles and didn't really do anything else on their own. Even in a set where there's a big theme like spacecraft in this one, you're just not always going to have things line up the way you want them to, and those cards are terrible when they don't. So, but it is upside on cards that are already good that have warp, like the ones that have interest triggers, like the 3/2 Angel. You can tap it, get counters on things, in addition to everything else it's doing. So it makes the mechanic even better. All right, now let's move to the mechanic I referenced a minute ago, one that pays you off for warping, and that is Void. So this is a mechanic that pays you off for having a non-permanent leave the battlefield or warping a spell. And it gives you some effect to make your card better, like if it's in your hand, or it's like an in-step trigger. So for example, we have Void Forged Titan, which is a 5-mana 5/4 with Void. And at the beginning of your end step, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or a spell was warped this turn, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So this mechanic is somewhat reminiscent of Revolt in Morbid, and that's not the best company to keep. These always look like they're going to be better than they are, especially if you haven't played with those other mechanics before. But it is shockingly hard to consistently trigger cards that say, if something died this turn, you get a bonus. Like, sure, creatures die all the time in Magic, but making it actually happen on the turn when you need it to happen is far more difficult and limited than you would think. One nice thing about this is how broad it is. You know, if any creature if any permanent, any non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, you get the bonus. So it could be your opponents, it can be any kind of permanent. Obviously, it works with Warp, like it says. It also works with another mechanic in the set that involves a certain kind of token you sacrifice, which we'll look at next. So there are like overlaps, but I'm inclined to think that cards that would be bad if they didn't have a Void trigger, like this one, Void Forged Titan, 5-mana 5/4 artifact creature, probably aren't going to be that good. They're probably going to be weighed down too much by the fact that it's just a 5-mana 5/4 way too often. And if you had to give up like a real resource to trigger Void to begin with, even that first trigger isn't going to feel that good. And actually getting the trigger is harder than you'd think. Basically, I think cards with Void need to already be pretty nice cards that then get even better because they have Void. And they've already shown us one of those, like Tragic Trajectory, which is modeled like right after Tragic Slip, a card that was a removal spell that got better when you did the Morbid thing. And Tragic Trajectory is similar. It's 1 black for target creature gets -2/-2 until the end of turn on a sorcery. That's a card you play 100% of the time in limited. It's just a good removal spell already. But then if you have Void, it does -10/-10 instead. So it can kill anything once you set it up. This is a mechanic that gets better when you have sacrifice stuff. It gets better when you have a lot of removal. Things like that do help it line up okay. But every single time we've seen one of these mechanics in limited, they really don't trigger as much as you would think they would. Like, it's easy to look at a card like the Voidforge Titan and say, well, it's gonna be like an Enters trigger that draws me a card. It can be, but you'd be surprised how infrequently it'll actually happen. So I don't think that card will be particularly good. I do think Tragic Trajectory will, because it's already a good card that then has this massive upside. All right, and then the last mechanic in the set is a new type of artifact token, and I feel like literally every time we've ever seen an artifact token, especially one that is plentiful in a set, they've been really good, right? Maps, clues, blood, like they've all been good. And we've got another one here that I think is gonna fall in that same category for limited, Lander tokens, which you can see on Galactic Wayfarer and Kavu Landseeker. So these are artifact tokens that you get, and you can pay 2 generic and tap them and search up a basic land and put it into play tapped. So they're a lot like clues in that the cost is the same of activating them, but they are specific about the card they draw you. They're always going to get you a land. That is kind of a downside compared to a clue, right? Clues are going to be better late most of the time because they give you a better chance at finding a real card when you don't really want to land. But these do fix your mana in a big way. They make sure you don't miss land drops. Landfall is in the set, as I've already alluded to. It helps you trigger your landfall. It helps you trigger your void cards because you sacrifice this artifact token. That's a non-land permanent leaving the battlefield. And it means that fixing in this format is like inherently going to be good because of these lander tokens. Like, there are a bunch of cards in the set like Galactic Wayfarer and Kavu Landseeker, both of which are really efficient cards. You know, the Wayfarer is a 3-mana 3/3. The Landseeker is a 4-mana 4/3 menace. And they both just generate 2-for-1s. And I haven't even mentioned also just having artifacts in play has value in the set. So the lander token feels like it checks a lot of boxes, overlapping into multiple mechanics and archetypes. Whether you care about landfall, whether you care about artifacts, whether you care about void, it can help you trigger all of them. And it just gives you a full card of value when you have them. You don't always have the time to activate them, especially early, but they help you thin out your deck late still. Like I said, a clue is going to be better most of the time, but thinning out your deck helps too. And to me, these tokens just, you know, they're going to be good. Like all the other tokens we've ever seen, they generate a full card of value. When you staple them onto a 3-mana 3/3 that just enters and makes one, there's just no way that's not going to be one of green's best commons in the set. It's just too much value for it not to be. You know, it's not exciting maybe, but it does a ton of work. Like, it's just going to be really good. And it is interesting having a mechanic that is fixing like this. It'll be interesting to see what it means for the format. Will 5-color nonsense decks be more accessible because of them? Maybe. I mean, you're just going to have cards that come with fixing attached that add to the board and stuff, unlike most cards that fix your mana. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty high on the lander tokens overall. And of all of these mechanics, it's probably, I like Warp a lot too. Both of these are good value mechanics that allow you to generate a lot of value over the course of a game that make me think this format looks like it's going to be pretty fun. I'm a little more worried about Station and Void. I think there are going to be a lot of cards with those two things that just aren't good. Whereas I think most cards with Warp and most cards that make lander tokens are just going to be pretty good. I mean, I did mention some Warp cards that I don't think will be good, but I think that'll be few and far between because I think most of them will feel like adventures, which is a good comparison to have because adventures have always been so strong and limited. So those are the mechanics. You know, we've got station / spacecrafts and planets, void, warp, and lander tokens. Set looks pretty cool overall. It's going to be a lot of fun to play, and I'm looking forward to doing the full set review starting next weekend. If If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more videos talking about limited magic, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.
Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of Digital Fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and we are back at it with spoiler season for Magic the Gathering's Edge of Eternities expansion. Now, if you didn't catch it, I did put up a video earlier today because there was another leak, and I wanted to handle all of those leaked spoilers in a separate video all by itself. So this video is all of the official spoiled cards for day 2 of spoiler season. That's Wednesday, July 9th. So after this video, you should be caught up with absolutely everything that's been spoiled up to this point. And if you haven't seen any of my leaked spoiler videos, I highly encourage you guys to check those out. I have a playlist that all of my spoiler videos are in, and that's in the description and in a pinned comment. So check that out to get caught up on everything. But we're gonna dive right in. Before we do, please like the video. It helps me get out the video to so many more people. It helps the channel to grow, and I appreciate it more than I can possibly express with words. And be sure to subscribe, because we're going to stay on top of spoiler content and get it all out to you as soon as we absolutely can. Humanly possible get it out to you. So let's do the thing and dive right in. First of all, we've got Magus of the Moon. This is one of the special guest cards. Just wanted to show you guys a couple of the special guests really quick at the start of this, and then we can dig into the meat and potatoes of the standard legal cards. This is a 2/2 human wizard for 1 red and 2, and while it's on the battlefield, non-basic lands are mountains. Very cool card with a very cool treatment. Next up, we also have Nexus of Fate. Thank God this is a special guest card and not coming back to standard, because I would lose my mind and pull my hair out of my head. This is 2 blue and 5. You take an extra turn after this one, except you also put it into your library, shuffled into your library instead of into your graveyard after you cast it, which means there were a bunch of combo decks back in the day when this was standard legal, where you would just keep drawing into the Nexus of Fate and recasting it, and it was obnoxious, and I never want to go back to those days. But still really cool to see this as a bonus sheet card. Just very grateful it's not in standard. And then the last one here is Paradox Haze, an enchantment aura for 1 blue and 2. Enchants a player, and at the beginning of enchanted player's first upkeep each turn, that player gets an additional upkeep step after this step. Really cool card with a really cool treatment. But let's move on to the standard legal spoilers. First off, we're gonna start with the commons, but the commons are honestly looking kind of crazy today. This is Hull Carver, a 1/1 death-touching artifact creature robot assassin for just 1 black mana. It seems like all of the commons these days are kind of pushed, and they're all completely and utterly playable and limited, which I sort of love. It being a 1/1 death touch for 1 is going to keep a whole bunch of stuff at bay and limited, but it's also an artifact, and that's absolutely going to matter in this set, and I think it's going to matter a lot more than people have caught on to already, so pretty cool card. Next up, we've got Ilvoy Galeblade, which is also a really good common, a 1/1 jellyfish warrior for 1 blue mana. It has flash, it has flying, and as if that wasn't enough, you can pay 2 mana and sack it to draw a card. This just seems awesome. You can hold up interaction, and if you don't need to use the interaction, just flash out the Galeblade, swing in for a little incidental damage every single turn in the air, 1 damage, tick away at your opponent's life total, and then later on in the game when it's outlived its usefulness and there are much bigger threats on the board, especially if your opponent has a big flying blocker, you can just get rid of it and replace it with a new card. everything about this seems really, really good for a common. Commons are just so much more pushed these days than they used to be, and I think part of that has to do with the new play boosters that they've been using for the last handful of sets rather than just draft boosters. They kind of reorganized the way they handle commons and uncommons, and it just kind of seems like there's no such thing as an unplayable common anymore, which is a good thing in certain cases and also kind of an annoying thing in others if you're someone like me who spent a lot of time getting really good at limited only to realize that now it's really hard to not be good at limited. Anyway, we're gonna move on. Next up, we've got Nutrient Block. I think this is the last common of today. Just a 1 mana artifact food that has Indestructible. You can sacrifice it and pay 2 to gain 3 life, but also when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you get to draw a card. Kind of an interesting card. If you turn it into a creature, with some of the cards that turn artifacts into creatures in this set, it keeps the Indestructible, which is really cool. But also there are a bunch of cards we've already seen in this set that care about sacrificing artifacts. So if you're using them, synergizing those types of cards with this, you get extra value that when you sack this for whatever value you're
You won't believe what I got today. Oh my god. See, milkfish is real. Too much big. MashaAllah.
Phyrexia shows no mercy, so neither will I. One down. Who's next?
Is Break Striker beefed up with extra armor?